right, guys, thank you so much for joining us. I am so proud to introduce you guys to the CEO and Deputy Director of Spotlight PA. They are a statewide nonprofit newsroom that does investigative reporting and service journalism on threats to democracy, government accountability all across the state of Pennsylvania. And they are really, really awesome fundraisers who do a lot of messaging and a lot of work to support that mission. So I'm really happy to introduce you guys to their CEO and founder, Chris Baxter, and their deputy director, Joanna Zuckerman Bernstein. So I'm going to let them take it away and fade into the background. You guys ready?
Great. Thank you, Beatrice. It's great to be here. Thanks for having us. And always great to just take some time to talk about revenue, how to get those dollars in the door. And like Beatrice said, with me here today is Joanna Zuckerman Bernstein, who's our deputy director. And Joanna really oversees all the nuts and bolts on the finance and fundraising side, including our grant work, etc. And also, I think hidden on the call, I think I saw her, is Michelle Mertz, who's our Director of Individual and Corporate Giving, here today as well. We are going to walk through a little bit about, real quick, just a little bit about Spotlight PA, and then talk a little bit about the way we think about member revenue generally and our approach to that, and then kind of hone in on how that relates to Democracy Day or democracy messaging, democracy work in general, and how we try to really nimbly pair whatever's happening on the editorial side with our fundraising and revenue messaging at that time. So we'll walk through that. At any time, if there are questions in the chat, please feel free to drop them there. We'll also make sure we're going to leave plenty of time at the end for discussion and questions and what have you, at least 15, 20 minutes or so. But feel free to drop things in the chat as we go if you want to just get it out there and don't want to forget. So to start, I'm Chris. I'm the CEO and president of Spotlight PA. I've been with Spotlight PA since essentially its birth in 2019, coming up on 5 years actually, which is pretty crazy. And as Beatrice mentioned, we are a statewide news organization, so we cover the state capitol, the wider state government bureaucracy, and then sort of what we call urgent statewide issues, so important policies and topics that don't get enough attention, and how they intersect both in our local communities and in the capital of Harrisburg. By way of background, we're 26 folks. We have 18 direct editorial positions. As I mentioned, we're 4 years old, coming up on our 5th anniversary this year. We are a $3.5 million operation, according to our 2024 budget. So just some, again, more context. By way of background, just because I think it's important to mention, we are a member of the News Revenue Hub. So we do have some of those sort of MailChimp to Salesforce connections, et cetera, realizing that some people on this call may or may not have those capabilities. So I just wanted to kind of note that up front. And with that, I'm just going to share a little deck here to guide us as we go. It's nothing fancy. Just give me 1 second.
Joanna, do you want to introduce yourself really quick while he's getting set up?
Sure. I'm Joanna Bernstein. I'm the Deputy Director of Spotlight PA. I've also been with Spotlight PA from the beginning. I was one of Chris's first hires. So we've evolved from, about a $1 million revenue organization in 2019 to now raising over $3 million last year. And Chris and I, we were very fortunate to start out with a grant runway that was raised for us by the Lenfest Institute before any of us were hired. But then Chris and I were responsible for launching all of the individual giving, which has just expanded beyond our wildest dreams. We have 5,000 individual donors now from all over the state giving between $5 and $1 million. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm excited to get to know some of you here on the call. It would be helpful maybe if some of you can introduce yourselves in the chat, just to see who's here, like say what organization you're from and where you're located. And we do want this to be as interactive as possible. So please interrupt us with questions. I'll monitor the chat. Thanks a lot.
Okay, perfect. Sorry, there we go. So to start, I just want to kind of define some of the ways we talk about things, just so that's clear as we move forward. So we split our revenue categories between what we call members, which are folks who give anything less than $1,000 in a year, and major donors, which are folks that give 1,000 or more in a year. So primarily here, we're going to be talking about that membership piece of the pie. Last year, or for 2023, we broke $500,000 in membership revenue for the first time. I think we actually got close to 525. So when we talk about that, we are, again, just talking about those donors that are giving less than $1,000 in a year. So how did we sort of get there in 4 years? So big picture, we tried to coordinate our membership strategy really across kind of a multi-channel approach, and always in tandem with whatever is happening on the editorial side. So none of our revenue strategies are dictating anything to editorial, of course, but we're always present and aware on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis what is going on the editorial side and how we can take advantage of that. To do that, we set a membership revenue target for the year, as I'm sure most do, and then we take that membership revenue number and we break it down by month. So we look at what each month did in the prior year when budgeting, and then we set targets for ourselves on a month-to-month basis. Then from there, we track membership revenue on a weekly basis within each month. So we track week to week the membership revenue to see where we are trending against the month's goals. And then we use that information to be nimble within the month. So we're never falling behind. We're never waiting till the end of the month to see how something's turning out. We are very on top of membership. The hub told us, at the very beginning when we joined, there's sort of ABC rule, which was always be campaigning. And we have really taken that to heart. And so within any given month, we have developed different levers to pull if that revenue is trending on point, high or low. And those levers cross kind of a multi-channel strategy. And again, I want to talk about all this because Democracy Day is another sort of marker or milepost that we use to execute our larger strategy. So that's why I think it's really important to talk about this larger strategy first, and then we can talk about how we apply it come Democracy Day. But Democracy Day is not the only milepost throughout the year where we apply this. We do it across a number of opportunities. Democracy Day being one of them, Giving Tuesday being one of them, Sunshine Week being one of them, and other types of milestones throughout the year. So our strategies for membership fundraising cross multiple channels, and that includes direct mail. So that is direct mail solicitations with business reply, prepaid business reply envelope work, which we started last year, but also more simple kind of postcard direct mail work. And this is all primarily to our existing donor base, although we have done some paid acquisition by mail as well. Obviously, emails, so email marketing, which is what I think we're all most familiar with, straightforward. We also operate all of Spotlight PA's work is available at no cost through a defined partner network. So by that, I mean, we are not an open kind of steal our stuff model a la ProPublica, where it's like, you can go on our site, here are the rules. If you want it, copy paste it, and we're cool. We have a defined network, meaning all of our partners are signed to a license agreement to be able to republish our work. They're able to access it at no cost, but they do have to follow certain rules of the road in order to republish. And also they have to do some pretty basic things to help us just continue to provide them this great work at no cost. And that includes assistance come times when we are fundraising to help as they are comfortable helping. And often that will take the form of running an op-ed for us when we might be running a fundraising campaign, etc. And then, of course, we have events as well. And I should mention within emails, we have our direct kind of email marketing, like our campaign marketing, but we also have our newsletters, which contain a lot of marketing in them as well. And then, of course, direct on-site in addition to that, which would cover kind of the graphics, etc. Anytime we do a campaign, we always have a match. We never run a fundraising campaign without a match. We found that they are simply too powerful of a tool to not use. And so when we do our larger foundation grant work, and we work with our foundation partners, we will often have discussions with them way in advance as to whether they're comfortable with us positioning some or all of their grant dollars as a match at some point. And that's because we plan our campaigns through the year, and we make sure that there's a match for all of them. For example, in March, we run our Sunshine Week campaign. And for the past, I think this will be the third year, we have a foundation funder in Pittsburgh that gives us a gift specifically to serve as the match for that campaign, which they like because we can very directly show them, hey, your investment in us at 25,000 leveraged this much in additional support through this campaign. And also they get kind of good exposure as a supporter of our work through that campaign, which is usually two or 3 weeks. So they're getting a lot of mention that way. And then within those campaigns, we try to theme weeks. So if we have a 3-week campaign, or if we think about the end of year campaign or news match, we will try to go through and theme out each week for a couple reasons. One, to vary our messaging, because we know no one particular message resonates with everybody. Number two, we also know and have learned, right, that urgency drives giving. So we always see at the end of the campaign, right, when there's like 2 days left, 1 day left, 48 hours left, we're so close, all of that urgency language works. And we know that. The theme weeks allow us to create, I don't want to say artificial, but it allows us to create waypoints within a campaign to build in urgency language without having to always wait just till the end of the campaign. So maybe there's a special additional match that week. Maybe there's a merch giveaway. Maybe there's some other sort of thing we're doing. Maybe we have set a goal for that week to get to 100 gifts. And then at the end of that week, we can do messaging of like, we're really close to 100. We have 80 out of 100. So we create those urgency moments more often in a campaign than just waiting until the end of whatever that campaign period is. Joanna, did I miss anything on our kind of high level approach to membership?
I don't think so. I put some things in the chat, including our Democracy Day op-ed from last year, that we asked our partners to republish, and also an example of a postcard from a different campaign that we sent to previous donors who hadn't given in a while.
Cool. And speaking of those donors, right? We, with every gift, right, there's an ability to leave us a note. Most of you probably have that ability as well. If not, I highly recommend it, because almost all people will leave you some kind of note with their gift. And we use these notes, and there's some examples here. We use them in two ways. So one, we're looking to see, like, is our messaging being parroted back to us? So are the words or marketing language we're using at that particular time showing up in the giving? The flip side of that coin is we'll look to see if the way people are writing things in the notes maybe differs from our messaging. So obviously the messaging is getting them to give, but we might see throughout the notes that people are using different words, or ways to describe things than we are, and we might adjust. And I'll give you an example of this that we shifted 2 or 3 years ago. And again, this may seem small, but part of our approach is, like, we pay attention to everything, even the small things, and make tweaks, and we think it kind of all adds up in the end. But we had noticed that in the gift comments we got, people often said that our work was vital. The word vital appeared a lot in gifts, whereas we had been using a mix of words. We had been using essential journalism, we had been using critical journalism, or journalism critical to democracy, essential to democracy, et cetera, et cetera. But over time, we kept seeing the word vital more than anything else. And that wasn't necessarily our kind of preferred word. So we shifted our messaging and tweaked, and now default to that word because we saw it used more often by our donors. So paying attention to how people are kind of parroting your messaging back, either confirming kind of what you're doing, reaffirming what you're doing, or also maybe allowing you to see slight tweaks and shifts you could make to that.
We
Oops,
also,
sorry.
just one other comment, we also
Yeah.
use these quotes during campaigns. So we often say, you know, thanks to the 200 people who've given so far, including Chris B, who said, you know, Chris B from Allentown, who said X. And we found that to be really effective. So definitely, it's such an easy thing to add to the donate page. And it's been so successful for us. I really encourage you to do that if you don't have it already.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Every newsletter section that we have during campaigns. So during a campaign, every newsletter will have a block in it that's a campaign block. And it will have our campaign tracker. It will have a little blurb, right? Our marketing pitch. And it will always have a real person and a quote, as Joanna mentioned, as do pretty much all of our email marketing solicitations and a lot of our direct mail too. In part because we want people to know that other people are giving, so it's not like they're alone. But also it's a little bit of a guilt factor. We want them to see that other people are stepping to the plate to support what we're doing. And so we feel like, you know, when we remind them of that with these quotes, it's again, these are all small things, and in a vacuum, no one of them adds up to hundreds of thousands of dollars. But we do, again, think that all of these little things do matter. And when we put them all together, it creates an effective strategy. That's a large overview. So now I want to talk about, like, okay, how do we actually execute around, and I'm going to obviously use Democracy Day as an example, waypoint, milepost, messaging point, whatever you want to call it, to be able to run a campaign. So we always make sure that our fall campaign in September overlaps with Democracy Day. and we will begin to sort of prime that pump in advance. So our graphic, donate modules, etc. For the beginning of the campaign. So this past week, I believe our campaign started the Saturday before Democracy Day, and then I think Democracy Day was a Thursday or Friday. And so the campaign had been going prior to Democracy Day, but the messaging was all oriented towards journalism's, vital role to democracy that week. So in addition to the on-site marketing, newsletter marketing, which there's a packet of examples that I provided Beatrice that she'll distribute afterwards that has all of these examples in them. But that week we will have the graphic marketing on site, and in newsletters we'll have the newsletter module with a specific call out around Democracy Day on the day of. We'll have a specific email send about Democracy Day on the day of. We'll have a op-ed from me, which is essentially a fundraising op-ed that we'll publish on Democracy Day. And we'll ask all of our partner network to publish the same op-ed on the same day. So what we're trying to do is create as much sort of, you call it noise, but it's buzz, right? We're trying to create as much or open up as many channels of giving around a single message at a single time. At the same time, we'll have sent a postcard. I think last year in September, actually, we did a direct mail campaign, a non-postcard, so a prepaid business reply envelope campaign to existing donors with a letter and a pledge form. And that message will be messaged around journalism and democracy. And usually that week we also have an event, and that event will be themed around journalism and democracy as well. You're probably sensing a theme here. We might have a sort of member only or higher level donor event that week. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. And then the final thing is we'll align something from our editorial coverage that week too. So this past year, it was the updated release of our election center for the November election. So we revamp our election center site usually about 2 to 2.5 months before the next election. And so on Democracy Day in the fall, we usually re-release the updated election center page. And then sometimes we'll also coordinate the release of how we're going to cover that election around Democracy Day as well. And that's really important because, the way we cover elections is very different from sort of the traditional horse race approach. It's very voter centric. It's very kind of service centric, in addition to the kind of accountability work that we do around elections as well. And so all of that together kind of encompasses, again, the multi-channel strategy around Democracy Day. Now, in a year like 2024, we're not going to wait, right, for Democracy Day to integrate this messaging. So we know in major election years that it's going to be a major point of news, and it's also going to be a major point of giving. So this year, we, at the beginning of the year, started that messaging. Again, we're sort of priming the pump. So at the beginning of the year, there was a note to email subscribers. We have about 34,000 newsletter subscribers from me that said kind of like what you can expect from us in 2024. And a lot of that was sort of election and democracy focused because that's what's going to be on people's mind. Now, not everything, right? And none of our messaging is exclusive around democracy and elections because, again, we know it doesn't necessarily appeal to everyone. It's not necessarily everyone's number one interest in why they come to us. So we don't do it exclusively, but we know it's a major avenue of giving and we know it's a major avenue of readership. So when it's going to be big in a year like 2024, we'll lean into it from the start. So we sent that note to readers, and then we updated. If you go on our website and you click into a story, spotlightpa.org, and you click into any story and you scroll to the bottom, you'll see we have what we call the membership box below the story. This is a complete ripoff of The Guardian. But it is it's a surprisingly long note from me explaining what we are, why we do what we do, and why you should support it. This has become one of our, this is our most effective on-site giving channel of any other ad slot, promotional slot on the site, etc. The membership box below articles is the number one channel off the site. And it's honestly one of the number one channels. I'm sure it's top 5. It's probably top 3 would be my guess of all of our avenues that we're trying to get people to give. And so we also updated that in January and gave it a slightly heavier focus on elections and democracy and journalism's important role in democracy. Again, priming the pump, knowing the year, priming the messaging, and keeping it present.
Can you just go back one slide? Someone asked.
Yeah, sure.
All the strategies we use.
Sure. Just give me a second here. Another thing I should mention that we also employ, so we have our regular email newsletters. We have about, I think 5 of them of varying forms, but we have one flagship daily newsletter, and we have one flagship weekly newsletter. And then in addition to that, we have a newsletter for our state college bureau, which is separate. We have a sort of positive news about PA newsletter that's a weekly, and we have a week in review newsletter that goes out on Saturdays. So in addition to that, we also have alerts, a set of regular alerts, and we try to budget at least one a week. We don't yet employ, just for those who might be wondering, we don't yet employ any desktop alerts. We don't yet have a mobile app, although that might be coming. So we don't have any mobile alerts at this time, but it would all fit into the same strategy approach. But what we do have are email alerts, 3 primary ones, breaking news alerts, obvious, voter alerts, and big story alerts, 4 main ones, and then impact alerts. I mention this because alerts are a way, alerts obviously are meant to drive traffic to a story, but their secondary function is to put fundraising messaging right next to what we think is a really valuable piece of journalism that might compel people to give. And so all of our alerts have, pretty direct fundraising messaging in them. And we will use those voter alerts throughout the year whenever there's a development that's important for people to know about voting in Pennsylvania. It could be a lawsuit, an outcome, it could be a policy proposal change, or it could be the rollout of our material, our election guide, the revamp of the Election Center website, any of our kind of major tentpole election pieces will also get voter alerts, and those alerts also drive giving. That is their secondary function. But when I talk about having the sort of fundraising piece of the operation, the editorial piece of the operation, always kind of talking, always aware of what one another is doing, it allows us to more easily see these opportunities. And then also by tracking membership on a week-to-week basis, we know, okay, it's mid-January, we're trending a little behind our goal. We're going to look for more opportunities in these next 2 weeks to put out messaging. We're not going to do direct standalone email solicits, but we're going to try to pull some of these other levers that we have to ramp up giving. So we'll maybe increase the use of alerts, or we'll re-promo a big story. Will send us, a note from me, the editor. Sometimes we do that to existing members, etc. So again, think of it as like we want to have as many levers as possible to pull when we're trying to get someone to give. And most times of the year, we're being selective about which levers we're pulling when. But when we're in campaign periods or like the Democracy Day, we're really pulling every lever at once, and we're coordinating all of that messaging together around one particular event or day. The last thing I wanted to mention here before we open it up and just have a discussion is there are challenges to messaging around democracy as well. We know from research that a lot on the Republican side of the political spectrum view language about democracy as sort of left or left-leaning. And there's an interesting research out there about the use of democracy versus the use of the word republic. Democracy is more favored on the left and republic is more favored on the right. It shouldn't be, right, that talking about the fundamental aspect of our structure of government in democracy should be polarizing, but it's important to realize that it is. Now, does that mean we run away from it? No, not at all, obviously. Democracy messaging resonates, and we believe it resonates. But we do try to be aware of this when we write things. So instead of just saying democracy, we'll be more specific about what we mean as to what our journalism is doing and how it is, holding our leaders accountable, etc. If you just say democracy, you might trigger a partisan approach. But if you say the specifics, like we're tracking your tax dollars, we want an efficient, if we're going to pay for government programs, we should know they're working and that they're measured on an outcome basis and that they're equitable. Our elected officials, we have a right expectation that they should be honest and ethical and working in our best interests. We all want, good schools, good quality of life. These types of messaging tend to cross partisan lines because we're kind of taking it out of that partisan context and we're just saying specifically like, Republican or Democrat, no one's really in favor of like politicians wasting their tax dollars. And so we try to focus our messaging on these areas that we know cross lines, in addition to using words like democracy. We also do some real simple things, like sometimes we'll just say democracy and republic, or so we'll just use both terms, or within an email we might use both terms sort of interchangeably. Again, all little things, not going to be the big difference maker, but it is important to be aware of as you go through. The other thing is that it's not just about the right. Like the word democracy is being used on the left to mask partisan news sites as well. So we have a progressive. Some of you might be familiar with the Courier newsroom, started by a Democratic operative, has a progressive agenda. We have one site here in Pennsylvania called the Keystone. No knock against the people who work there or the work that they do, but it is progressive. And if you search, negative stories of the past 3 months about our Democratic governor, you will not find them on that site. However, those sites have increasingly moved away from just being straightforward that they have a progressive agenda. And instead, it's this long kind of like flowing narrative about how it's about the protection of democracy. And they're pro-democratic or pro-democracy news sites. And so that doesn't really help the effort either. Because again, the word is being defined and redefined in partisan contexts. So just really important to be aware of that. And again, why, this is just one form of messaging we use. It's not the only form of messaging. A lot of our messaging throughout the year will be about accountability, our investigative work, holding our officials accountable, writing stories that no one else is writing. We have lots of other kind of columns of messaging that we use in addition to this one. So I want to stop there, ask Joanna if I missed anything critical, but otherwise open up the chat and just get into a discussion here.
Yeah, the only thing I'm not sure if you mentioned is that we have automations, fundraising automations running in the background at all times. This is something that the News Revenue Hub set up for us initially, and we've really taken advantage of. So everyone who signs up for a newsletter gets funneled into a welcome series of several emails, which all include a donate button and an ask at some point. We also have a renewal series that triggers when you're 60 days away from your renewal date, or the last, almost a year after you last gave to Spotlight PA. And that's several emails asking folks to renew. Most actually renew on the first email we found. And we, at the top of all of our newsletters, we have a renewal box with conditional language for folks who are nearing their renewal dates, and we tweak that language according to if we're in a campaign, and that box does very well. So yeah, I think that's the only thing. But what questions does everyone have about Democracy Day or membership overall? Let us know.
We could do this one of two ways, folks. We can have you use the raise hand feature, and you could come up on stage, quote unquote, and unmute and ask your question. Or you could drop them in the chat if you prefer to stay off camera and off mic, and one of our hosts here, instructors, can read them out and then answer them. So anybody want to raise their hand? If not, I have a couple questions to get us started, but I want to give some space to anybody who's been dutifully listening here and want to know. I will say, while we're waiting for questions, this is being recorded, as you obviously know. I'm going to send out the recording, the transcript, some resources to everybody who attended or registered. Are you too comfortable with sharing that slide deck, like a view-only version of the slide deck? So you'll get this as well.
And most of the goods are in that packet I sent Beatrice.
That's okay. Cool. That's what I figured. Yeah. All right. So any questions? Anybody want to raise their hand or? Okay, I'll start. I want to know more about these automations because this is something we've been, talking about doing at the Center for Cooperative Media for a long time in terms of fundraising, but also in terms of like welcoming and onboarding. Yes, I do, Beatrice. And I know MailChimp has, some they can do there. They're probably more sophisticated and tailored towards email. But what platform are you using? What kind of, what do you think is the one that saves you the most time and stress? And then what do you think the one is the most effective in terms of that funnel?
Yeah, so we use MailChimp, and we use the MailChimp automations feature, I think now called Journeys. And our primary automations are twofold. One is an onboarding or a welcome automation after you sign up for one of our newsletters. We actually just revamped that series, and we're about to relaunch the revamped version. But I think the revamped version will be 6 emails. And the goal of that is to introduce you to the newsletter, what you can get, why it's unique. We try to get you to interact with us a little bit via email because we know that anytime somebody replies to one of our emails, it's a very positive indicator within the algorithms that email domain and service providers use. And so, if you're Google or Yahoo or Comcast or Juno or Net Zero or whatever, they are constantly running algorithms to figure out whether the email you send is valuable to the people you're sending it to who are on their system. And one big kind of positive check in your favor is if they're interacting with your email. So they're clicking a link, or one of the best ones is that they're hitting reply. So we also use the onboarding series to encourage those interactions. And then eventually at the end of it, once you've been with us with the newsletter for a while, a month or so, there will be a fundraising message as well. But one thing we're revamping is sort of making sure we establish the value of the newsletter first, let that ride for like at least a month, and then come in with the ask later, as opposed to kind of doing it all at the same time, which is what we had been doing in the prior automation. And then the second primary automation we have is the renewal series that Joanna mentioned. So it triggers, I think,
I'm sharing it now. The first email. Yeah.
Great. So it triggers, remind me, Joanna, about 30 days prior to your expiration.
Yeah, we can actually see here. I can't remember. Oh, no, I don't think we can because it's the parameters. Yeah, it might actually be a little bit more than 30 days. Some point we're doing 60 days, but at least 30 days prior to expiration.
So it will trigger based on your expiration date, which for us is always a year. So if you give a gift, you're a member for a year. So your expiration date will be a year from your last gift. And that will trigger. As Joanna said, the first email is the most is the highest converter, and it sort of drops off slowly from there. I think now we have, what do we have, 6 in the renewal automation?
Yeah, 5 actually.
5.
Yeah.
Okay.
We had 12 at one point, but we realized that people weren't really giving much after the first few emails.
Yeah. I'm glad Joanna popped this up though, because this piece that she's showing right here is something that we include in every email to make sure that people have the information they need to give the way they want. And since we've started doing this, we've seen an increase essentially across all of these channels. Because again, we're just trying to meet people where they're comfortable to make a gift, whether that's PayPal, Venmo, sending a check, which is huge and continues to expand for us. Direct mail, direct giving by mail is really big for us. And so we include this in pretty much every automation or email campaign, etc. To your question, Joe, I would say the renewal series is the most valuable because obviously we want people to renew and to manually keep track of constantly when people are expiring, and to remember to reach out to them, etc., is a lot. And so this is really our most valuable. We have a retention rate of about 74%.
Damn.
And I think that is in part from the renewal series, but also we do a lot of other things to make sure that you give again if you haven't given in a while. So you're gonna hear from us. And I probably should have said at the top, like, we are aggressive about membership and about giving. We're sort of unabashed about it. And we do that because we are a nonprofit, and that is how we pay for the work. And we're not ashamed of that, but we're also not going to hide that. Right. And so, and if you don't like the messaging, you can reach out to us and we'll put you on a do not promote list. And you also have the option to opt out of fundraising through your email preferences. But otherwise, like, we're going to do it. And when we run campaigns, do we see, higher unsubscribes during those times than normal? Yeah, sure, we do. But in our mind, that's just the cost of doing business. And people really, our readers need to understand that this is how it works. And so we're really not shy about it. And shockingly, we get so few complaints about that. I mean, again, we are really aggressive. We are constant campaigners. I would think people would complain more, but they don't. And in part because I think we're getting them accustomed to the business model. Like, this is what it is. Megan?
Beatrice, you want to say something?
Well, yeah, before we get to Megan's question, I just wanted to shout out Alice's question. A lot of our Democracy Day newsrooms are 1 or 2 or 3 or a handful of people shops. So Alice was curious about how many people are overall dedicated to your membership and campaign strategy work. And I'm going to add in if you can kind of differentiate between their different roles in case people are interested in building out their fundraising teams, especially in 2024.
Yeah, I mean, I can start. So at the beginning, it was really Chris and me, really me full time. But we got an AJP grant and we were able to hire a membership manager and a major guest director. And my role changed significantly. So I'm not as involved anymore with campaigns, and I do a lot of operations work. and overall strategy and grants. So it's really Chris and Sean, who's our membership manager now, who work on these campaigns.
So Sean's really like the engine behind them. He's doing a lot of the work. My role, and the way I see my role, is opportunistic, right? I'm always looking again for opportunities when there's really good work on the editorial side. There's a messaging opportunity. We're watching our overall patterns. So we're watching our renewals, we're watching our retention rate, we're watching our number, our percent of members who are recurring members. In the past month, we've been paying a lot of attention to how we renew recurrings when their cards error out or expire, etc. And all of these areas are really important. Once you have someone in, the work isn't over. You then have to kind of steward them and retain them and make sure we keep their giving going. So I do think it's an important piece of any leader's role. But we also keep perspective, right? Like membership last year was $525,000 for us. It's a lot of work and takes a lot of attention. And we know, for example, our major giving, right, has a lot of potential to be much bigger than that. So we make sure not to outsize. Like in my role as a leader, I make sure I'm not spending too much time on membership and then neglecting major donors who at the end of the day are probably a bigger pot, of potential support overall. But they're all important and they all kind of work together.
Megan, take it away.
I had a follow-up to what you were saying about giving people the option to opt out of fundraising. Do you promote that in any way? And how so?
Yeah, so on any like fundraising message, there'll be a note at the bottom that says like, if you don't want to get these fundraising messages anymore, here's how you can opt out. And if we get emails, like anytime we get an email from someone just complaining about a message, or maybe they'll send a check and they'll say like, I'm only going to give once a year, like please don't bother me in between, or anything that might indicate like they don't want us to message them more often, we will add them to that group. So we're kind of like liberal about it. It also in part because even if you're in that group, you're still going to cross our messaging, right? Like if you're on our site, you're going to see it. If you're in our newsletters, at some point, you're going to see some form of messaging, especially if you're getting close or you've expired on your gift. So it's not a complete blackout, because frankly, that would kind of be impossible even if we wanted to, because there's so much integrated language around. Yeah. But it is a much lower volume.
We also have this button, the Support Spotlight PA orange button, in every single newsletter, not just in fundraising messages. And I think we have this to stop receiving fundraising messages. Like this was a voter alert, not an appeal message. So it's here even at the footer of the voter alert. So it's pretty easy to opt out if you want to.
Thank you.
Margaret has a question. Margaret, do you want to unmute and ask?
Hi, everyone. This is Margaret Coker from The Current in Savannah, Georgia. My camera's not working, so you just get my disembodied voice. My question is one of sort of pragmatism, I think. How do you keep your relentless donor campaigns from cannibalizing each other? Are you targeting a certain part of your membership list for certain asks, or is it just full bore all the time?
Yeah. Well, there's a few different things. So our cadences are different, right? So we're not always in full campaign mode, right? We have, I think, 4 full, like actual fundraising campaigns a year. We'll do our Sunshine Week campaign in March. We'll do our spring campaign in May. We'll do our fall campaign in September, and then the end of year campaign for November, December. In between that, it's just a lot of integrated messaging. So integrated messaging into the newsletters, those renewal boxes on site, the membership box below articles, the alerts, etc. If we are trending below a goal for a month, we have some other tools that we use sometimes. So in the past, we've done like a quick, like 3-day, like help us end February strong campaign. Like, say we're just trending like $2,500 below goal for that month. We might use that campaign strategy at the end of the month to just do a very quick campaign, just juice up a little bit of giving, and then move on. There are definite trends. Like, I don't want to say trends, but there's like a feel to the giving, right? Like, if you don't do a campaign for a while, and then like we don't campaign a lot in January and February because we just came out of Newsmatch, so we use a lot of other integrators and other kind of renewal strategies to get our giving up. Then we don't want to do a big campaign, but we will in Sunshine Week, right? Second week of March. And that will probably be a strong campaign because we haven't done much direct fundraising for 2 months. So I always say, like, there's slack in the line. People are going to see that match with that campaign and they're going to come forward, and it's probably going to be pretty strong, especially at the kickoff of that. And then it might tail off a little and then get high again at the end of the campaign. If we run campaigns too close to each other, we can feel that. Like the second campaign, if it's too close to the most recent one, it won't be as strong at the start of the campaign because, again, from our perspective, there's less slack in the line. However, we ran our numbers last year, I think, and on average, a donor for Spotlight gives, I think, 3.7 times a year. So you can't think of it as like they made a gift this year, so we shouldn't bug them again. That's not true at all, and our data does not bear that out at all. So we don't heavily segment campaign to campaign. What we will do some parameters. So if when we run our Sunshine Week campaign in March, we will exclude anyone who has given probably in the past 90 days from that campaign. So they won't get any messaging. We will also exclude anyone who has recently been added to our subscriber list. So that's mostly signed up for a newsletter within the past month. So anyone who's new to our subscriber list in the past month, we're going to exclude them because we don't want to hit them with heavy fundraising message too soon before before they've really derived value from what we do and are ready to give. We'll also, in a campaign, we'll exclude our no promotes. We call them our no promotes. So our opt out of fundraising, our do not solicits, we'll exclude those as well. And occasionally we will vary solicitation messaging between existing members and non-members. So sometimes we will try to bump up our new donor number in a campaign by only sending maybe an additional email or two to non-donors. So people who are not active, haven't given within the past year. So yeah, there are ways we kind of do that, but we're not heavily segmenting. And we haven't found it. I think some people have found success with this. We have not. When we try to like segment and message around one particular like topic area or whatever, it doesn't work for us. It's too niche, and there's too small of a slice on any given topic within our audience to resonate. So we've moved away from that. We've moved away from kind of testimonials as like the whole send. And honestly, we kind of run the same playbook each year. Sometimes we straight up reuse a lot of emails and messaging that worked the year prior because no one's really going to remember it a year later. But it's pretty generalist around, again, the importance of the work, et cetera, et cetera.
One other thing I want to add is that if you give a recurring gift, like a monthly recurring gift, we will not bother you at all. That's the gold standard. And we've also done things like, and Newsmatch does this too, you know, give a gift and we'll match it 12 times, a recurring gift, and we'll match it for the full year value. Or, you know, we really want to boost our monthly recurring donors. And we take them off all campaign emails.
I have a
good point.
question. I have a question. I know you guys mentioned that you guys do not run campaigns without matches. Like I said, a lot of our newsrooms are small, hyper local, scrappy, and might feel nervous or some imposter syndrome about kind of securing bigger philanthropic donors, grant organizations like Lenfest Institute to help them out with this stuff. So when you guys first started, how did you go about pitching yourselves to make those matches happen and build those bigger partnerships?
Yeah. So when we started, we didn't really know any of this. So we didn't always have a match when we campaigned at the start. I think the first kind of matches we had were the first year we participated in Newsmatch. And we just started to see the results from campaigns that had a match versus the results of campaigns or solicits that didn't were dramatically different. And so we talk about it as a with our bigger donors as an incentive, right? It's not like if you gave $5,000, we might come back to you and say, hey, like we're so appreciative of this, and we want to leverage the support so we can unlock maybe $5,000 more dollars. Like we want to make your investment in us go twice as far. Would you mind if we added your $5,000 to our end of year match pool? And sometimes people say no, but I would say more often than not, people say yes, because they don't have to do anything. They're just sort of agreeing to allow us to message and leverage their gift that way. So one thing you could do is just think about like, okay, whatever your sort of spectrum of giving is, you could set a threshold and say, okay, for every gift we get this year over $500, we're going to just automatically, as a matter of practice, we're going to ask that person if they would be willing to have us add that to our end of year match pool and leverage it come Newsmatch. That's one way I think to think of it. With the match, do we name the donor? So a lot of the times we do, but we always ask their preference. Because some people want to be, some people don't. Some foundations want to be, some foundations don't.
I definitely prefer to name. I think it looks a lot better to name the match donor. And it's also, I mean, added PR for them, especially for a foundation. Like I think the Benter Foundation, which provides our Sunshine Week match in March, like they like that they get their name out there. And so it's just a bonus for them.
Yeah. And it shows buy-in, right? It's like all these different people have given to leverage more giving. It shows passion, it shows investment, and again, kind of builds on itself.